welcome action fans, and thanks for joining us for another edition of All 90s Action All the Time. As we near the end of our journey looking at some of the highlights and lowlights of action cinema in 1994. I'm your host, Scott Murphy, and on today's show, we are looking at an early Stephen Chow effort, Love on Delivery. We don't have a special guest this month, but I do have my regular co host, podcaster, stand up comedian, screenwriter, and our very own resident evil karate master, Mr. Craig Draheim.
The woman ate my ticket. Which is one of the only lines in this movie I could remember to be like, oh, I'll use it. But okay.
Yeah, I use that one. I use that one.
Yeah.
For sure.
點解我碗湯裏邊有隻烏蠅㗎？屌佢！仲嚟呢招？
咩條件先符合你嘅要求啊？佢一定要一個真正勇敢嘅英雄。
路體狂，唯有輕度弱智兼阻差辦公。
拜拜。
我哋走先啦。我等我腳冇咁震，個心冇咁亂嘅時候，我都會走嘅。阿伯，你冇嘢啊，伯伯？
冇嘢，一個夜粥頂得住，夜粥即係功夫。我就係中國股權法嘅掌門人。十字電光，就算你肯學㗎，我都未必教。
我要成為一個最強嘅人。
Very good!
Now, on to today's film, which I'm going to warn you right now, the stats are a bit lighter this month. But what we do know is it was released on February the 3rd, 1994, in Hong Kong. Now, there is no sign that it was released theatrically in the States or the UK or here in New Zealand or basically any English-speaking territory in theaters. I think it must have just been came on VHS later, I guess. It was directed by Lee Lik Chi. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Who was a frequent Stephen Chow collaborator. He also directed such things as From Beijing with Love, Fording Scholar, and a bunch of other Stephen Chow movies, kind of pre his Shaolin Soccer breakthrough. It was written by Vincent Koch, who also was a writer on Fording Scholar and From Beijing with Love. Critically, I don't really know where it's sitting because it has one critic review on Rotten Tomatoes, positive review, I shall say, and it has nothing on Metacritic, so I can't tell you much there. However, I can say that it has a 62% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, which isn't amazing, but it does have a better 6.8 out of 10 on IMDb, and a very, very handsome indeed 3.7 on Letterboxd. Usually I round out the stats with box office information, but it is unclear what this movie made at the box office, because if you weren't released theatrically in the States, you basically didn't exist according to box office information sites like Box Office Mojo and the numbers. So you basically just can't get the information, or you would need to dig far deeper than I can in the kind of searches that I do for these episodes. I think you need to have a more deeper exposition into box office information and probably contact somebody in Hong Kong, which I don't have the resources or time to do that. Apologies, all 90s action fans, if I'm that appears slacking on my part. But yeah, generally I just get the information from the box office website. So there we go. There we go. A bit lighter on the stats today, Craig. Not a ton of information on this movie.
Much like, well, we'll get into it. But I was gonna say, much like the movie itself, is a little light, but
It it is indeed. It is indeed. I also like there's not uh it is interesting. Like there's not a ton of like trivia information I could find either beyond just kind of some random facts on the Wikipedia page. And it is interesting, like a lot of these films, I was actually surprised that yeah, like the kind of lack of information for these films, you know, like and like it. I was actually surprised because this is a relatively obscure film, so I was
yeah.
surprised that this was widely available streaming because there is much more well-known films like some John Woo films like A Better
Mhm.
Tomorrow or Bullet to the Head, which I've not seen, or is that what it's called, Bullet in the Head or Bullet, um
Um,
but
yeah,
I always get confused. It's Bullet in the Head. A Bullet to the
yes,
Head is the Walter Hill Stallone. Yes, right.
yes,
Okay, okay.
yeah.
Damn. Yeah, Bullet in the Head's not streaming. I've not seen that one, but it's supposed to be one of John Woo's classics. And The Better Tomorrow, and the film we were originally going to cover, the Jet Li film Fist of Legend, um, which is supposed to be one of Jet Li's best, and I think is inspired by, or I don't know if it's just inspired by, or if it's a direct remake of Fist of Fury, but I know it's connected. Yeah, that film is also hard to find. We originally were going to do that, but it wasn't. Again, couldn't find it streaming anywhere. So we had to move on. But this film, which is more obscure than any of the films I just mentioned, is is what streaming. It's streaming. Well,
Yeah.
here it is. It's streaming on Prime Video, and like it seems to be pretty widely available.
Yeah, a lot. I know realized a lot of this stuff is just streaming in general, or
Mm.
some way or another, either through here in the States, either Prime or Tubi, even because I know his Chinese Odyssey Part 1 and 2 are both on Tubi, and then I think a bunch of his other stuff is as well. Um, but yeah, maybe he has a special deal with
Maybe he does.
streamers. Yeah.
Maybe he does. Like, all these, John Woo and Jet Li films that we can't get, but Stephen Chow, he has the power.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
uh,
well,
yeah.
I mean, research throughout the years with Stephen Chow, he was kind of, I don't know how to explain it for, I know, American audiences, because he has a bigger, um, he's bigger than that, but he was kind of like our Jim Carrey, or is like the, biggest comedy star of all time in a way,
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess, like, I mean, Jim Carrey is like a decent analog, I guess, because like
Yeah, Jim Carrey during his 90s peak, or something
yeah,
like that.
Jim Carrey, because like as we all know, um like very few actors, hardly any actors, have had a better year than Jim Carrey had in the year we're talking about,
Yeah.
1994, where he not only did he have Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, he also had Dumb and Dumber, and he also had The Mask. All three of which films appear in the top 25 box office for that year. And I think, if I
Mhm.
remember correctly, The Mask is like the fifth biggest film of the year. And so like I think Dumb and Dumber might have even made the top 10 as well. And then Ace Ventura is slightly lower down the list. But like, yeah, yeah, like so kind of he's as big as Jim Carrey in 1994, which is
Yes.
about as big as you can get.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I guess first things first, we usually talk about our kind of relationship to the films that we cover. Sometimes we have quite a deep relationship. Certainly with a number of the films we covered this year, like like The Crow and Leon and Speed and True Lies and all those types of films, Clear and Present Danger. I've seen a number of times, and other times we don't have don't have such a relationship. So Craig, you go first. Had you seen
Okay.
this film before?
I had not. I went through. I mean, I'm a big fan of Stephen Chow's. Um, in the States, I would say like he didn't really, at least from my perspective of when I first kind of remember seeing his stuff, like Shaolin Soccer kind of made its way over here and gained a little bit of a fan base, but then Kung Fu Hustle is where the only film of his that they really marketed, I think, fully. And then after Kung Fu Hustle, yeah, he kind of dropped off again. But yeah, I've watched a good amount of his. I mean, obviously his later stuff. Um, I've watched the Chinese Odyssey parts, and then Beijing with Love and all that. But I actually had not seen this one, and I know it's definitely not a. I don't recommend it for most people, but I sometimes randomly I'll go on those rankings of like, oh, how do they rank a certain person's movies or whatever, just for fun. Um, and I know this one is always kind of keeps popping up in the middle of the road of his kind of his movies, of it not being his best, but it's far from being like his worst.
Yeah, that's I mean that's true. And I'm kind of in the same I'm kind of in the same boat. I've not watched Stephen Chow's movies extensively, um, but I feel like it was the same. You know, I certainly that certainly feels the same for me. Like you know, when I was growing up in Scotland, that like in the UK, Shaolin Soccer again was kind of his breakout film in the UK. That had like a little bit of a kind of cult following, which included myself. And then Kung Fu Hustle was like his kind of his big hit. And even though I've not seen like a ton of like his like 90s stuff, I had heard of the likes of King of Comedy and the likes of From Beijing with Love and stuff like this. But up until basically we just, decided to substitute this film for Fist of Legend, I had never heard of this film at all.
Yeah.
um, so it was not only a first time watch, it was a brand new discovery for myself.
Yes.
So like, completely new, and like, but yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of people quite highly rate it. As I mentioned, it's got a 3.7 on Letterboxd, which is very high score on Letterboxd. Some people are very very keen on this film. Um, and I did see somebody like when reviewing it, saying that basically, uh like no idea script idea was turned down for this movie.
Okay.
um like
Yeah, that does make
you know
sense when you watch the
like
movie.
well, that was their sense of the movie, that no script idea
Yeah.
was turned down.
Okay.
And I that's not a fact. It's just like their sense of the movie, and I understand their perspective.
Yes.
Because this is such an interesting movie, because I found this movie to be a joy.
Yeah.
But and I don't know how you responded to it. I'll ask you in a second, but I have to say, I think like things have changed a little bit, but this is such a Hong Kong movie, and it's such a kind of Hong Kong comedy, and it's the exact sort of thing that when watching it, I was like, this is a great film. I honestly I had a really great time with it. I really enjoyed it, and when I came to rate it on Letterboxd, I gave it 4 stars. But at the same time when I was watching this, I was like, I can understand why they didn't release it in the States. I can understand why they didn't release it in the UK. I think like maybe like when Jackie Chan kind of became mainstream in the kind of mid to late 90s, in the UK and the US, like maybe things, people started to get a bit more used to the kind of very broad, very slapsticky kind of, very zany, kind of Hong Kong comedy humor. But I think this movie would have done nothing if they'd released it in the States or the UK in '94.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think for somebody like Jackie Chan, I think he is able to blend kind of where if the comedy doesn't necessarily hit, at least, you have the very kind of serious action set pieces where
That's true.
yeah, where something like this that is straight comedy. Um, I mean, I agree with you. I found it to be a joy as well, and a lot of fun. And I even, when I was kind of reading up on it, one of the things that they talked about, especially with the translation, is that it was somebody from they were from Hong Kong, and they talked about that there was a lot that didn't that kind of got lost. A lot of the comedy gets lost, even in the translation, because of either through the dubbing or the kind of typed translation in general, because it's so kind of Hong Kong specific jokes that anybody outside of that is probably not going to get.
Yeah, I get that, and I'm sure there's probably a lot of things that I probably didn't get because, like, I mean, and that's kind of the same for anywhere,
Mhm.
like, there's certain things that, um, even in amongst kind of English speaking countries, there's certain things like, from a point of view of being Scottish, there's a certain type of Scottish humor that might not translate particularly well, like that people might go over people's heads. Some of the kind of things, that might be funny to Scottish people, but other Scottish people, but might not even be funny to English people, or or
Yeah,
people, or people like from the Americans, Australians, New Zealanders, Kiwis, whatever. And it's kind of the same thing with like Kiwi comedies and things. So there's kind of these kind of cultural specific things. But I think like obviously it becomes like even more kind of one step removed from that when it is, because at least you have the commonality of the English language, whereas
yeah,
it becomes even like one step removed from that because it's like a different language as well. So yeah, but I think like because it's like based on slapstick, a lot of it, and slapstick is the most universal language of comedy because like physical comedy can translate everywhere, whereas verbal comedy usually requires some sort of, foothold in the culture, or understanding of the language, because it can often be based on kind of absurdities within the native language of where the comedy is coming from. Um, so I think there's enough here that even if you don't get any of the kind of Hong Kongness of it, that you still find it funny.
mhm,
And I guess like there is some cultural things I do understand. Like I do like mind you, even if you didn't understand, for example, even if you didn't understand like what a really huge pop star Jackie Chung is in Hong Kong, I still think that joke and that kind of thing of like the search for tickets for him and stuff like that.
yeah,
Even if you didn't realize that that was a real pop star, even if you didn't realize that that's one of the biggest pop stars in Hong Kong over the last 30, 40 years, whatever. I think it still works as a joke.
yeah. Well, and you can tell, especially it's a Hong Kong comedy because what pops up, and it's a bit, and I know it. They also do it in Japan occasionally as well, but like when somebody, it happens several times in this movie where somebody gets stressed or they get aroused, and then it's like the bloody nose thing. And I know Stephen Chow has used it several times in some of his other work, but it's like one of those key things of I don't know what.
Yes.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't. It's like it's almost like it's just one of those kind of tropes.
yeah,
It's like it's like that thing you get in anime where like somebody bleeds out the side of their mouth and then that's like when they power up and they beat the bad guy up. You know, like
yeah, yeah,
I don't know what I don't know where that trope comes from, but like if you watch enough anime, you're like, oh, it's shit's gonna get real now.
yeah,
The good guys comeback is on.
yeah.
um, yeah. So to add to the general confusion, um, so uh, we will just refer to Stephen Chow, the main characters that Stephen Chow plays, probably just as Stephen Chow.
Yeah.
Um, because there is some issues with the translation. Basically, um, eh, basically the names that you can find on Wikipedia, on IMDb for the characters, and the names that pop up in translation if you're watching it on, say, Prime, are different.
Mhm.
Um,
Yep.
the character is called Jin Yin in translation on Prime. The character Stephen Chow plays when listed on Wikipedia and IMDb is Ho Kam Ang. And all
Yeah.
the characters are like this, even down to the fact that the kind of judo bully guy in translation on Prime is called Grizzly and is listed on IMDb and Wikipedia as Black Bear. So none of it adds up.
Yeah.
So we'll probably just be naming actors and kind of describing their characters
Yeah.
for the most part, because it's going to get real confusing if I'm going to tell you the name on Prime and tell you the name or on translation on streaming and also tell you the name that is you can find listed on IMDb and Wikipedia the whole time. That's going to be a bit of a mess. So
Yes.
we're going to avoid that. um, so I think like this movie like really hits the ground running. It's kind of funny from the start.
Mhm.
We get first introduced to Grizzly and the love interest played by Christy Chung, who is Canadian and apparently did not speak Cantonese when this film was filming, but has starred in a number of Hong Kong films since, so presumably does speak Cantonese nowadays. Um, which I
Y-
thought that's one of the few fun facts I've found looking at Wikipedia.
Yeah, I noticed because I think she might live there now when
I
I
think
was
so.
looking at
I think so. Yeah.
but she was in a couple of the Stephen Chow films
Yeah.
as kind of as the love interest. Um but yeah, it starts off kind of right away of this judo teacher talking about how great he is and trying to train them, and then um while he's practicing on somebody, and then he finds her and he asks her out, but she just kind of deflects him in that way. And he's definitely an aggressive man and doesn't like the fact that she is blowing him off, essentially.
Yeah.
And
Uh, that,
yeah,
that that that's that's true, and he's introduced as a bit of a dick, and
yeah,
he remains a bit of a dick throughout the movie. He's a terrible bully character, um, but like I mean, I guess for people to understand, maybe people who have not seen this or not heard of this movie, um, it is one of those movies that is it doesn't have like a super strong kind of plot. There is a general
mhm,
plot. There's an outline of a plot, but for the most part, we're just looking for excuses to have a bit of fun. And like we have it's it's one of those movies that is essentially a series of sketches.
yes,
Um that are welded together into a movie. Now, like any movie like that, not everything works, but for the most part, I think more sketches work than they don't work. And I love the introduction of Stephen Chow's character, where they are riffing on Terminator. We see the garbage truck, and then we see the lightning, and then we cut to Like we cut to a very in shape Stephen Chow, which is like I have to not that he's like like super muscular or he's got a six pack or anything, but he's still quite in shape, and we're supposed to buy him as like this kind of like like nerd boy. But anyway, he's standing there naked in the Terminator pose, and then like two cops kind of come across him and shine their torches in his face, and he explains that he has been robbed of his clothes, and
Yeah.
but then it gets even funnier than that because it turns out that he gave the clothes willingly as like a homeless guy spun him a sob story that in a cutaway turns out to be true.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, and it's funny because how it starts off is he's like tough, and then once the police light flashes on him, he like starts covering himself and gets really insecure. And yeah, it goes down this whole process of like him going, well, the guy said he needed money, so I gave him what little money I had, and then it's and it keeps like progressing more and more until here he is naked, on the street. And then
Yeah,
the cutaway shows the man just talking about how nice he met such a nice and wonderful person
yeah,
the
no,
day that
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely, absolutely, and I think like I mean that's kind of the whole um that's the whole shtick of the film. Like,
yeah,
is like comic escalation all the time to the maximum absurdist level. Like one of the scenes that happens just not long after that is the guy who complains about the fly in his soup, and that goes from like them removing the fly out of the soup to them then like three people trying to stamp on the fly to then Stephen Chow like breaking a bottle to try and stab the fly, and then the guys also beating Stephen Chow up because like they think the fly's on him, and just the whole movie is like that.
yeah.
And if you like that sort of comic escalation, I think you'll have a lot of
Yeah.
fun with this movie.
But
However, I could
yeah.
see that some people would find it kind of relentless and maybe a bit exhausting.
Yeah. So I will say what's nice, and it's not every single time, but especially with The Fly, is that there's always some, even if it's not great, some justification. Like you
Mhm.
realize that they went to that extreme because at least in the version I watched, they make the comment that, oh, because then they don't have to like give the guy his money back. Like the guy gets so the guy who had the fly in his soup gets so uncomfortable, I believe he leaves or
Yes.
something. So they're like, okay. And that's so you kind of learn that that's just what they do, essentially. So they don't have to pay the man.
Yeah. Yes. No. I mean, like, and I think that does work because, like, they're kind of justify, like, they're kind of basically saying that even within the universe of the film,
Yeah.
this is a bit. Like they're
Yeah.
doing a bit, and like this is a rehearsed bit that they do to kind of scare off the customer so they don't have to give a refund out. So like yeah, you're right, you're right. So like they do kind of give some justification for this kind of absurdist reaction to like the fly being in the soup. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so what we find out is you have the judo master, which is either Black Bear or Grizzly, who again, as these are a bunch of sketches, we're kind of set up, I guess, from a normal, going from a more standard plot setup point that we think, oh, he's going to be the bad guy or the antagonist for the whole thing, which isn't really true. Like halfway through, he drops off. But yes, Stephen Chow is the delivery guy for this restaurant. And so he's making a delivery. And as this kind of grisly character is hitting on her again, she then, to blow him off and get him to move away, she basically says, oh, I have a boyfriend, and grabs randomly Stephen Chow and kisses him. So at that point, he basically falls in love with her, thinking that she really likes him. And that's kind of what then transpires everything else within this movie. And she's very particular about the type of man she wants, is the big thing, too, of that she wants somebody who's intelligent and funny and sensitive, but also masculine. And so you have somebody like Stephen Chow, who is supposed to be the sensitive side, and then you have all these other guys after her that kind of show the masculine side, but he's trying to essentially throughout it fill both of those needs of being the perfect man for her.
Yes, absolutely. And that kind of like we have like I guess we don't really need to go into the Jackie Chun stuff because like we have like this kind of again this kind of ongoing sketch that takes up I don't know maybe like 5-10 minutes of the film
Yeah.
where he tries to get Jackie Chun tickets and it's a whole ordeal and there's various good jokes in that but like in terms of like the main plot once we're got the Jackie Chun tickets or whatever, like this is like you say, you kind of in another film it feels like this would be the main confrontation because we have like a truly ridiculous bit where Stephen Chow's character tries to cross a road to get to Chrissy Chung's character, who is either Lee in translation or Lily based
Yeah.
on based on the credits. So like and he tries to cross the road. He nearly gets hit by a bus. He falls over. He puts his hand in
Yeah.
some looks like some dog shit. And then does this very funny bit where he tries to avoid shaking Christy Chung's character's hand and tries to shake her hand with her foot with his foot. And uh, so there's a lot of hijinks there. And then basically cutting back to the main plot, Grizzly tries to throw a punch at Stephen Chow's character, and then but Stephen Chow's character ducks and he hits Chrissy Chung character instead. And then this is a crux where it like basically she thinks he's a coward and rejects him because of that. And then he tries to show throughout the rest of the movie, that he's not a coward. However, as we've established, Grizzly is not the main bad guy. So the main confrontation. So we think it's going to be a more low level kind of Karate Kid movie, where we beat the bully. But there is later on in the movie there is another bigger bully that comes along, and like that takes the movie in an even more absurdist direction than it already had been. So yeah, we just get wilder and wilder as the movie goes on. But I guess like maybe this is a good point to talk about like his journey to try to not be a coward and how he meets up with his kind of his kung fu master, who tries to teach him ancient Chinese boxing. Yeah, maybe talk about that.
Yeah. So after he's rejected, he ends up he's going to buy a drink, and he essentially, it becomes for people that have seen some of like Shaolin Soccer, it's actually a lot of the same cast almost pops up in it. But because I think it's the coach, I want to say the same guy that's his kind of sensei in this movie is the coach in Shaolin Soccer, if I remember. I could be wrong, but I know that we as the audience basically know that this guy is scamming him and saying, "Oh, I can teach you how to do Chinese boxing. You don't need to go drink all this money, and here, if you give me this amount of money," and then as Stephen Chow, but the master who we think he's fake, but it actually turns out that he is a real Chinese boxing master. He keeps saying, "Well, the money isn't for me; it's for the school." But then it's clearly, he's just taking the money because he's willing to take whatever Stephen Chow is willing to give him. But throughout it, he's giving him kind of these ridiculous training ideas, and to the point where then he starts trying to just get rid of Stephen Chow when he doesn't have enough money to pay him anymore, and it's still he's following him around, like things like shoving your hand quickly in the rice, or it even gets to the point of where he wants to get rid of him so much that he says there's some special technique that you throw yourself down the stairs, and he ends up accidentally falling down the stairs, barely survives, but Stephen Chow takes that as, oh, he must be a true master because he was able to do that. Which then he ends up doing it, Stephen Chow, later on, when he's dressed as Garfield. And for people, I realize as I'm trying to explain this listening, it feels like I'm going all over the place. And because, yes, as I'm listening to myself talk, I'm like, I am making no sense at all.
Yeah. So like obviously Stephen Chow has like a roster of people he often works with, because like the guy who plays the master, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Nigman Tat. He is he is the person you think he is in Shaolin
Yes.
Soccer.
Okay.
He's in Chinese Odyssey Part 1 and 2. He's in King of Comedy. He's in this one. So like again, like Stephen Chow obviously has certain people that he likes working with, and we discussed that the writer and director in this film have worked with him before, and after. And so yeah, I think there's certain people who kind of crop up quite a lot. And like yeah, there's so many funny bits in this. Like when he's doing we have the little montage of like him showing off the ancient Chinese boxing techniques, and he's really serious about like this technique, and and stabbing into this and chopping this. And then like one of the last ones he does is like he puts like the eggs over his eyes, and he has the thing,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then he just admits that like, no, this isn't like a real technique at all. This is just something from like 1970s Japanese television, like
Yeah.
I'm just doing as a bit, so like so that's great. And I don't like maybe we're kind of rushing through him. We'll cut back to the
Yeah.
earlier stuff again, but I have to say that when Stephen Chow's character has the Garfield mask over his head, and he has the fight with Grizzly stroke Black Bear, it is genuinely, and the way like the way he keeps getting beaten up, and then he keeps popping back up again and doing the Superman stance, and like the sound effect that they give it when he pops up again, the kind of gee, like genuinely one of the funniest things I've ever seen.
Yes. So basically what happens is he gets all of this self-confidence in it, thinking he's such a master, even though he hasn't really been trained at all. That again, Grizzly / Black Bear decides to make advances on Lily or Lee, depending, and he's definitely more forceful this time. And so yes, Stephen Chow pops up with kind of this Garfield mask, so nobody knows his identity, which then moves on to what happens on basically in the second half of the movie. But yeah, throughout the whole thing, he is not winning the fight at all. He's just able to take all of the hits until at a point that he latches onto him and does basically essentially a barrel roll where he's just bouncing around with him.
Yes.
With Grizzly, and they're bouncing all around to the point until Grizzly gets knocked out. And at that point, then yeah, Stephen Chow is able to run off, and she is forever looking for the man who was underneath the mask, because that must be like her True love.
Yeah, no, by using it like by using the special technique, which
Yeah.
even down even down to that, like the translation is so wild. Like
Yes.
we cannot sort anything out, because like in the translation on streaming, the technique he uses to roll down the steps is called Invincible Fireball. But in the description on Wikipedia, it's called the Invincible Windfire Spin. So we got. I don't know if because there is a mixture of like Cantonese and Mandarin used. I don't know if like there's been like a translation from Mandarin and a translation from Cantonese, and like that's where we're getting all this confusion from. Is that
I'm
possible?
that might I mean I didn't think about it that way, but that might be it. Because I'm
Um,
pretty sure the version I watched too was it was dubbed.
Oh,
And
okay. No,
so
I watched it with
and I
subtitles on
yes.
on where I watched it streaming. I watched it subtitles.
Yeah, so mine was dubbed and then I had the subtitles like the subtitles on, and it was one of those weird moments where they were even within that they were different. Or then it's
Okay,
finally like, okay, yeah.
okay. So
So
we
yeah.
we like yeah. All right. I guess like either it is like they're working off like two different things where it's like one translation's been done through Cantonese and one through Mandarin, or into English. Or we've just got like different translators who have like just translated it slightly differently, and yeah, there's just I don't know. Usually,
Yeah.
I've not had this as incident before, where we've talked about a film that we can't get a handle on the translation.
Yes.
I guess we've not talked about tons of non-English language films, and in the few years we've been doing the podcast. But yes, we
Well, and I
can't
also
we
yeah.
can't get firm answers on anything in the film.
And I also wonder though, since it is kind of more of a straight comedy, if part of the translation is trying to make the humor stand out more for, English speaking audiences. So certain
Possible, yeah.
things that are probably more literal in translation, they're like, oh, well, that wouldn't be as funny, like for this audience in the States or whatever, wherever, or Scotland or New Zealand. But if we kind of change it to this, that's a funnier version, which might be a reason too. But yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah. And also, I do wonder when the translation was done because,
Yeah,
like, because certainly in not one of the film's famous moments, but there is a scene at a press conference later on in the film where there's a kind of pretty homophobic joke that has like a Brokeback Mountain reference. Um, and I was like, oh, but Brokeback Mountain came out in like 2005. So like, when was this translation done?
yeah,
I was like, was this film just not available? For like until like the late 2000s or something. So I don't even know when this film became like available
oh,
in like English speaking markets.
yeah,
Like based on that one kind of not very good joke. Um,
yeah. No, that might make sense because especially I can't remember what year Kung Fu Hustle came out, but
I
maybe
think it
it
was
is.
'04 or '05. I
Yeah.
can't. It's around that area. I can't remember specifically. Um,
So I
but
wonder if it was like because of
post Kung Fu Hustle, maybe. Yeah.
yeah, the hype he got from that. They're like, oh, we should start kind of releasing his other movies out that way.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah. I'll just I'll do the very exciting googling while podcasting.
Yes.
That's what people come to podcasts for. It was
Yes.
2004, right?
Okay.
So yeah, maybe a couple of years after the kind of success of that, maybe they were like, oh, well, people seem to like this guy, and maybe we'll roll out other Stephen Chow films.
Yeah.
But it is interesting because you can very much see that this is the same people who did Kung Fu Hustle.
Yeah.
But it is interesting as well because like even that film, it is weird that like it became as big as it did because like again, that is a very Hong Kong comedy, and the
Yeah.
kind that usually bounces off kind of Western audiences are certainly English speaking audiences. But for some reason, it was people ran with it. You know, like I just find that interesting because it is very
Yeah.
much in the same wheelhouse um as a lot of comedies that do like a very broad style of humor that I think often, and it's not just specifically a Hong Kong thing, it's often why, like for example in the UK, while you get like a lot of art house films from like for example France or Italy, you don't get a lot of comedies because the the French humor and Italian humor and Spanish is kind of the same. It's very broad, it's very zany, and it's very in your face, and it's in a way that British audiences and American audiences don't tend to connect with, so they don't tend to get distribution in America or the UK. And it's kind of the same. Obviously, the Hong Kong comedy is very different from like French or Italian or whatever, but like the commonality between it is its kind of broad, zany, in your faceness that often doesn't connect with British or American audiences, which is why they're often not released.
Yeah.
But it is interesting that like you know Kung Fu Hustle is really no different to this film, and it's kind of peak that sort of humor, and yet it did find an audience.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. That is kind of fascinating to look at a lot of the times. You even look at places like Scandinavia and their comedies are just how on the
They're
opposite end of the
yeah,
spectrum, it
they're
is.
if like in terms of like European comedies, like they are the two different. But you get on one side, you've got like the French, Italian comedies, which are the most broad and slapsticky and zany, and then on the other end, you've got Scandinavian comedies, which are tinder dry.
Yes.
Which a lot of them don't find distribution in like in like the UK or or the States, again because some people won't even recognize them as comedy because
Yeah.
they're so dry. And like I think like maybe because I mean, Scotland's not a million miles away from, we're kind of in Northern Europe as well. So maybe like there's a certain dryness that Scottish humor has, even more so than English, that Scandinavian comedies still work. Because we have a kind of dry, kind of relatively dark sense of humor as well. So that kind of that kind of still kind of works for myself and a lot of other Scottish people, I guess. But yes, like again, like you say, those comedies often don't find distribution
Mhm.
in like the UK or the US for the opposite end, where people just don't realize they're comedies at all.
Yeah. And I wonder, I can't remember now just because of how many years it's been, but I wonder if the success of Kung Fu Hustle was more based on marketing, because I think about it like if it was, I can't remember how it was treated, where if it was treated just like, oh, it's this kind of, it's a kung fu movie with kind of a little bit of humor. But I know, of course, at the time too, you have somebody like Jackie Chan coming off of like part 2 or 3 of Rush Hour, and so I
I
think they
guess.
probably rode that wave a little bit. But even like talking about British humor in the States, I remember when because Shaun of the Dead came out, I know since it's the 20th anniversary, it was on my mind. And it kind of like doing pretty well and then gaining a cult following and then hitting mainstream. But then when Hot Fuzz came out, it was more. I think it was mismarketed at first, where they were like, "Oh, it's this kind of silly comedy," and then so in the States, a lot of people going in expecting kind of like a I don't even can't think of it, or not to the extent of Naked Gun, but I think they're expecting more something like that, and then
But it
then they
wasn't
get
that. Yeah.
Hot Fuzz.
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, it's interesting just overall to see kind of as we've been discussing that how even from American to British humor, just in comedy in general, you can kind of see this shift in how it's marketed and everything like that. But
I guess
going
I guess
back,
that's
yeah,
true.
yeah,
Like, because I guess there is. I mean, obviously, there's differences between like American and British humor. Like, I think I used to think that like British comedy did like surrealism more, or were more, or did surrealism better. But
yeah,
I think like it's just different. Like, and I know this is like a particularly kind of niche comic reference, so like this might go over the head of quite a few people. But like, if we were to take, for example, the likes of like Chris Morris, who did like Brass Eye,
mhm,
um, and then we took like, for example, like Tim and Eric, I would say that like British surrealism is bleaker and darker,
yes,
and American surrealism is grosser.
yes.
But
Well,
yeah.
yeah. Well, I know that's a conversation we had a long time ago where um I think I was talking about that. Yeah, we even have kind of fine-tuned our our I say subgenres, or even with even more subgenres where like black comedy or dark comedy um kind of covers all, but then we have like, well, there's black comedy and then there's cringe comedy, which you wouldn't call Curb Your Enthusiasm black comedy, you call it cringe comedy, and it's like all of
Sure,
these
yeah,
different
yeah, yeah, yeah.
little kind of niches or niches,
Yeah. And I think like I guess like um some probably kind of have like crossovers in subgenres, because like I would say that like for example, something like I Think You Should Leave kind of crosses over like cringe comedy and anti-comedy.
yeah.
Um, we're getting very technical.
Yes. Little do a lot of people don't know this, but Scott and I actually, despite doing horror and action podcasts, mainly talk comedy when it's just us not recording, and so this is
that,
our
that
opportunity to
that
talk
is
about that.
that is true. That is true. And we're big on very niche comedy, and we're big on kind of debating the kind of genres and subgenres of comedy. And obviously Craig has done a whole PhD on
Oh
offensiveness in
no.
comedy, and we talk a lot about that. So yes, we mainly off air are, a little do you know that off air our conversations usually revolve around comedy, and yeah, that's why we've gone off in such a technical tangent
Yes.
on comedy subgenres.
Yes.
But
But
I guess we should go back to Love and
yes.
Delivery. But I will say about this movie that in terms of like us kind of like analyzing or discussing or debating kind of like the plot, like we often do on this podcast, this movie completely defeats that.
Yes.
Like there's really no point in kind of like analyzing it or kind of rating it that way, um because like as we've discussed, it's like it's a series of bits. They do like and we come in and out of different kind of sketches that kind of vaguely form a plot, and we have a showdown at the end, so we do have an actual climax. But really, really, we're here to discuss like kind of our favorite bits from
Yes.
the bits that
So,
they do.
so what I will say, what's funny is that so after he saves her to kind of with the Garfield mask, and he's trying to be romantic and not revealing who he is, and so on and so forth. Um, then you have like all of these men then showing up in Garfield masks. So there's this whole scene of her just basically being chased, and then he's trying to be like, no, but I'm the real guy. And even people that like his mentor, his master, who knows it's really him who is the one who saved her and did all that, it's like he doesn't care, and they're all like crushed or stuffed into this car trying to drive, chasing her, all these kind of basically, yeah, gross men dressed as Garfield,
Yes, I think
attempting to
like
get a date with her to say they're the ones who saved her.
yeah, I think like before like going back to kind of the biggest laughs in the movie and kind of the things that we enjoyed about this movie. Um this movie I don't want to beat this movie up too much in on the old kind of problematic kind of elements. But
Yeah.
like this movie does have an interesting relationship with sexual harassment.
Yes.
In the sense of like generally we are on the side of good. Generally, the people who are sexually harassing get some kind of punishment, or beaten down in some way, or humiliated in some way. And we even get a very sweet moment where the Lee Lily character, played by Christy Chung, like after kissing the Stephen Chow character, says like apologizes and says, "Oh, like like you know, I shouldn't have done that without your consent," and then obviously Grizzly gets beat up for sexually harassing Lily Stroke Lee, and also these gross men end up in a hilarious car accident. So like for the most part, we seem to be on the side of good. However,
Yes.
there are certain moments where for example, there is a training montage where the restaurant staff and Stephen Chow's master are just sexually harassing a bunch of women at a swimming pool. And it seems like we're supposed to think this is terribly funny and it's all fun and games and ha ha ha. And there's other moments where the master kind of sexually harasses people where, again, we seem to not commenting on that, and kind of thinking it's quite funny. So yeah, it does have a confused relationship with sexual harassment throughout the film.
Yeah. Yes. But overall, yes, we are on the side of Stephen Chow, who is not one of these people, and that's how we
That's
kind of
true. Stephen
we
Chow, at
yeah,
no point does Stephen Chow's
yeah,
character sexually harass anybody. Some of
and
his
that yeah,
friends does, and it kind of lets him off the hook for it, which is
yeah,
kind of But
yeah.
yes, that's true. At no point does Stephen Chow's character do anything like
But yeah, to the point that basically what sets him apart is that like every other character, male character in the movie has some prime moment of sexual harassment. He's the basically the only one. Um,
That's true. Of all the good guy characters and all the bad guy characters,
yeah,
it's got quite a fatalistic view of the universe, this
yes,
movie, actually, for such a silly comedy. And it's
yeah,
basically telling us that basically only one man in like 50
yeah,
is not an active groper.
yeah,
Which is pretty, pretty depressing view of
yeah,
humanity. Or, pretty depressing view of masculinity.
yeah. So he gets to the point that he finally is going to tell her that it's him, and because she knows that the real person that'd be the hero, how it proves that they would be is that they wouldn't reveal their true identity. And so we were supposed to think, oh, she knows it's him then because he hasn't revealed. But then this is where the kind of main bad guy pops up about halfway through, where an old school friend of hers that had been studying in Japan um, pops up, and she thinks that he's the one who did it. And he seems like he's kind of just the straight-laced, glasses, well-to-do guy, which then plays into the joke later on because I'll get to that we'll get to that in a bit. But so that is the thing that this guy now takes credit for. So yeah, we meet the kind of official bad guy, and he's straight-laced. He basically takes credit for this, and then she even believes him, and basically they now go off as lovebirds, her and the new bad guy, to the point that Stephen Chow, in one of the funnier kind of action-based bits, decides that he's going to fight him. And so he sends a letter, and as the letter receives, or he goes to the front desk of this guy's office, sends the letter, and him and his master go to view basically the guy, and they watch him very easily beat up every other martial arts master in in the area. So he's a karate master. He beats up the kind of judo, the American boxing, so on and so forth, punching them through walls and everything. And so it's this kind of silly bit of them trying to then get the letter back of because he doesn't want to challenge him anymore, knowing that he'll be beaten to a pulp.
Yeah. No, it's a very good scene, and I think that like obviously there's a lot of history and rivalry between Hong Kong, China as well, but like Hong Kong, China, and Japan. So like I think they're kind of riffing on that, and like this arrogant guy thinking that karate is superior to all other martial arts, and like then we're pinning it up against ancient Chinese boxing, and so there's obviously kind of regional stuff going into, because this happens a lot in Hong Kong films where like the evil Japanese, and obviously there's a long history to that, which this 90s action movie based podcast doesn't have the bandwidth to really to go into the murky waters of that history, but obviously you can read about that on your own time. But there's a lot of that in Hong Kong movies. I think this riffs on it as well, and but it's a very fun fight sequence. Between this guy, the karate guy, and the other masters who, you know, like you said, do judo, do boxing, do taekwondo, you know, all these different martial arts, and he, you know, just gets rid of them. Also, like, I do think that we should, in terms of like the action, in terms of like action and action-based gags, I did think that there, I did think there was quite a funny gag where Stephen Chow's character has like a kind of daydream nightmare where he reveals that he was like he's the guy under the Garfield mask, and Lily doesn't like believe him and like pulls out a gun and like shoots him,
Yeah.
and it's like proper. It's like proper kind of John Woo stuff, even to the fact that there is a bunch of doves that fly behind him.
So, that's what I mean. Essentially, with this movie, because Scott, you've already said multiple times that feels like a series of sketches that are linked enough to make a plot. But it does feel specifically that this is the whole thing is an absolute parody on all the major action films of that period. So yeah, you have the John Woo, you have Terminator, you have basically the Rocky montage type stuff. You have it's like
yes, and it's like the inverse of a Rocky montage, because they're not actually doing anything like physical. Like they're just like you know, eating hot pot and like having fun times at the pool and doing karaoke and like and you realize, and again there's like a justification for it, because like you know, the master is kind of like, this is mind games. The basically the other guy will kind of psych himself out because he'll be thinking like, well, that they can't possibly just be doing that.
Yeah.
Like, what are they doing secretly? You know, what are they bring up? So they do kind of create this kind of comic justification for it. But it is very funny. So yes, no, they are kind of riffing on all the kind of action of the day. Also, like, just as a quick side point, I was genuinely surprised when this movie started because because it is riffing on a lot of different stuff, a lot of the action of the day, both in terms of American cinema and Hong Kong cinema. I was blown away when this movie started and it was a Shaw Brothers production because I was like, I had no idea they were still making movies in 1994 because I so closely associate Shaw Brothers with like kind of like 60s and 70s and stuff like that that I was like, oh, holy shit. I don't know if that took you by surprise as well.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Because I didn't even make the connection till later on. Because I was like, oh, I know that name, but I feel in the same way. Like, oh, but it can't be the same. Guys,
Yeah.
get it?
I know, but it's the same logo and everything. Like
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
start, so I guess it's the same company. Like, but yeah, no, it took me by surprise. I just thought I'd mention that as a kind of little sidebar point. I also love that there's like a kind of anything goes feeling to these types of Hong Kong movies where often you might not like the fact like there's like a random musical number at the press conference that you're like, where the fuck did this come from? Like that's the whole movie of just being like, what? Where did this? Where did they? And like all the kind of escalations of things, like it just takes everything to the most absurdist level, and I'm here for it, Craig. I'm here for it.
No, I agree. So basically, as we get through this, he challenges him, but the idea is that, well, that he could survive. If I'm remembering it correctly, he can survive the 3 rounds. It's not even that he has to beat the kind of the karate master. It's just that he
Yes.
won't be killed.
Yeah, he'll get to the end of the 3 rounds. He'll still be standing at the end of the 3 rounds.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yes.
And I guess
yeah,
we should mention in terms of actual plot stuff that the master, who up until this point we assumed was a con artist because like he's kind of even admitted himself like the techniques that he taught Stephen Chow's character were kind of phony techniques. They were just kind of nonsense and basically just ripped them off. So like we just think of him as con artists, but it is revealed when they're trying to get the letter back that this guy, who I'll just use the translation that was in the subtitles that I watched, which in the subtitles that I watched he was referred to as the devilish muscle man, is actually like a real within the story is actually like a real martial arts master who defeated a lot of karate masters, but then came up across one who was the teacher of our main bad guy, or the sensei of our main bad guy, who like crippled him, broke his leg, crippled him.
Yeah.
But that he's actually like a legit guy, and then we go into him like training him in a more legit way, or certainly training him more legit in the art of mind games.
Yes. Because even the mind game stuff comes when the actual match happens. Like he tells them, well, don't face him, and they'll just draw him crazy because then he'll run at you. And so it's like a lot of stuff like that. So then you see kind of the karate master inside his head for a good portion of it, of like, why isn't he charging at me? Or when he's watching the tapes of them training and it's just them having parties or things like that. And so you see kind of this karate master slowly unraveling over the course of 10 minutes or however long the period is that we're kind of seeing this, as you called it, the inverted montage.
Yeah, and we can't oversell enough like how funny like the final fight is. Like the final fight's amazing. Like each of the 3 rounds each have their own individual personality. Like Craig was saying, round 1, Stephen Chow's character has got his back turned to the Karate Master character the whole round, and the whole round is just watching them kind of face off against each other. And then we also have like a really good gag where the commentators don't know what to commentate on. So then somebody else gives them a script of like another epic fight that is like is a fiction, and but as they're reading that, they kind of run out of that, and then they're like, "Oh, we still don't know what to commentate on." And then somebody hands them something that's like a kind of erotic fan fiction,
Yeah.
like which is very confusing to Lily and co. Or Lily and her girlfriends who got stuck in a lift and are listening to on the world's most bizarre lip radio that like it's this radio that's got this mouth in the middle of it that is like kind of yapping away. It's a very strange and disturbing thing to look at.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
It
then
almost, it felt like it came out like a David Cronenberg
yeah,
movie.
it did, didn't it? Like it was so it was like a prop from Existence, even though Existence wouldn't be made for another 5 years. Like it is that's kind of what or even a prop from Videodrome or something.
Yeah.
Like it is very yes, it's very bizarre, and some of the things are like I'm not even sure if they're supposed to be jokes, but they're just like weird things thrown into the film because they're like, why the fuck not?
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I think as much as I was entertained by round 1 and also by round 3 where he's just using the kind of like technique to kind of tie him up the tie him up technique, they're both hilarious, but I think I found round 2 the funniest, where the master is just throwing random weapons up in the air, and like the look of fear on the karate master guy's face, and like just the look of sheer mischief and joy as this karate master is throwing axes, he's throwing knives, he's throwing grenades. Like it just gets progressively more and more nuts. So I think round 2 was my favorite. It made me laugh the most.
And what's best about that? So he's not throwing them at the Chinese boxing master, the con man that we assume, is not throwing it at the karate master, so he can't get in trouble for it. And then the karate master even says to the referee of like, "Aren't you going to do something?" And the referee is basically like saying, "No, just make an exciting fight already," or something. You know, where he's criticizing them because nothing is happening in this fight.
Yeah. So far there has been no action in this fight. So like yes, the referee does absolutely nothing. Yeah, the way the master is throwing out, he's throwing them up in the air towards this kind of the kind of the light, the kind of spotlight that's on them. But yeah, not throwing them directly at the karate master. And then they make this kind of noise as they're kind of tinkling along the kind of rafters, and then they're falling back down at random points, and even something hits Stephen Chow's character on the head. It's just there's so many. Every scene is packed with so many different gags. It's kind of hard to keep up with them. You know, I tried to kind of write down as many kind of things as possible, and as much as I'd never seen this film, like because we took a while to record this episode, I've now seen it twice in a month. So like I tried writing everything, but it's too kind of difficult to kind of keep up with because there's there's just so much kind of packed in. Like as much as like the plot is very loose and very thin, like they really made a lot of effort for a lot of these gags, some of which are quite elaborate, some of which are quite throwaway, but they packed as many gags as they possibly could into this film, and God bless them for it.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of mentioned earlier Naked Gun. I guess the best way to describe this movie is a Hong Kong action film through the way of like Airplane with less plot and more attempts at gags. I don't even know how to like for somebody that hasn't watched it to try and fully explain the silly tone of this movie.
It is quite hard to describe because, like, I could understand somebody being annoyed, or not getting it if they went into the film, what if they went into the film basically expecting a Jackie Chan movie, which kind
Yes.
of like Jackie Chan movies have like silly, absurdist kind of comedy within them and slapstick comedy within them, but it's a wildly different tone from this.
Yes.
Like, and also like the percentages. Often with a Jackie Chan movie, not with all of them. Some of them tip more towards comedy, but usually with a Jackie Chan movie, most of them. What would you say? Maybe that it's like maybe 60-70% action to 30-40% comedy, where this is more
Yeah.
like 80% comedy, 20% action.
Yes.
Yeah.
And even compared to something like Kung Fu Hustle, which will have moments of like dramatic elements, kind of, or things like that. This is just a pure wackiness, I guess. Like there is not a moment where it's well, maybe a moment of heartfelt, but there is not a moment of like
There's the odd,
seriousness.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's the odd moment of kind of like sweetness, I would
Yes.
say, but yeah. There's no point. There's no dramatic points. Like this is a wacky zany movie from beginning to end.
Yeah.
Like this is and I don't mean this as an insult. Like this is a pure clown car of a movie of just it's coming at you from beginning to end. It doesn't slow down. It doesn't stop hitting you with gags at any moment. Like there's no kind of moments where we kind of focus on or we get serious about. It's not like it takes a turn and we get serious about the final fight, or even if we get too serious about the kind of tension of like the relationship between like Lily and Stephen Chow's character. Like there's really none of that.
Yeah.
No, this is kind of, you kind of know where it's going in terms of like you figure that like Stephen Chow's character will win in some sense, which he does. He survives the 3 rounds. He doesn't win the fight, but he does survive the 3 rounds, and of course he gets the girl in the end.
Yes.
So you kind of know that that's going to happen, and you're not mad about it. It's like it's predictable in that sense, but there's so much. For my money, there is so much like comic invention going on that I still think it's absolutely worth the journey. But yes, if you've not seen this film, if you've not heard of this film, and you go into it expecting like a police story, or an Armor of God, or like any of like Jack or a Rumble in the Bronx or whatever, any of the kind of Jackie Chan films, that's not what this is. There's no
Yeah.
point where there's usually a point in those Jackie Chan films where shit gets real at some point, or there's some dramatic moment or something like that. There's none of that here. This is
Even
pure silliness beginning to end.
even Drunken Master has moments of like very
Yeah,
serious element. Yeah.
that's true. Even something like Drunken Master has the odd moment of kind of And even more so with like like Drunken Master 2, which we covered at the start of the year, which I would say is probably it's still comedic, but it's probably less comedic than the first Drunken Master. Like the from the late 70s. But again, yeah, even something like Drunken Master. So like, yeah, don't go in expecting like a Jackie Chan comedy, which really balances the comedy and action. This is the comedy portion is way more than the action. Like to the extent where it's like we're on the outer edges of being able to cover this film. To be honest,
yeah, I would say the first time I watched it, I did have that thought for this recording. I was like, we are definitely reaching with this one, but
this, well, like, yeah. I mean,
neither of us knew at the time.
No, neither. This does feel like a kind of, I would say, I hope people enjoy this episode, and I hope people like listening to this episode go out and watch Love on Delivery, because I think it's a really fun film, and it seems like, well, certainly based on the IMDb votes, so that they're only about 3,000 or whatever. It seems like an underseen film as well. So I hope people go out and see it. But no, I got to the end of it and I was like, oh, this is a one for us film, Craig. This is like we're just doing this for our own fun and amusement. We can almost justify covering this film, but it does feel possibly beyond our remit.
Yes. Well, and what's great, so kind of wrapping up with the movie itself, what's great about it is, so he survives the rounds, and which means an essentially a win, even though the karate master wins the match itself. And they have the Rocky element of like the Adrian type bit. But the karate master gets so upset that then he begins fighting everybody in the referees, the commentators, the audience, to which then Stephen Chow's character beats him really. So he might not have won the match, but then he kind of, he does show that he's able to beat this karate master.
That is true.
Yeah.
And I guess that we should describe just how he defeats the karate master, because like, again, it's hilarious. Now we talked before about how he defeated Grizzly, where he did this move where he bundles them up. He bundles them up together, and they're both kind of doing a forward roll together. And depending on what you've depending on what translation you're seeing, it might be described as Invincible Fireball. It might be described in some other way. What was the other one? Invincible Wind, Fire, Spin. So one of those where they're kind of bundled up, doing a kind of barrel roll together. And they did this bit down a bunch of stairs, defeating Grizzly. But obviously, due to the rules of comic escalation, they have to do it kind of bigger and weirder to defeat the Karate Master. And they do, because they've got this prop. Now, imagine, most people have seen bingo before, and the kind of little thing that they keep the bingo balls in and they turn around. Now imagine that, but like a larger version that's maybe like 20 feet tall. And then
it's like where they'll drive the motorcycles, those stunts or whatever.
Exactly.
Like
exactly. Like that, like at the carnival, like the motorcycle thing. So they got that, and they got the giant bingo ball type balls in amongst that for like doing like a lottery. And then they do the Invincible Fireball in this. And I can't possibly describe it in a way that notifies you of just how funny it is. Because like, just speaking about it, you need the visuals to really get the impact. But I can assure you, dear listener, it's freaking hilarious. Yeah. So Craig,
Yes.
what did you make? What did you make of this grand finale moment?
No, I loved it. I think we've kind of said this movie. I was not even as watching kind of a lot of the later stuff of Stephen Chow or some of the other ones. I was
Yeah.
not expecting um, the level. I knew it was going to be ridiculous, but not to the level that it was. And yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. I wish there were those moments where I know we've talked about earlier on in the episode of, either certain jokes lost in translation or things like that, that I was envious of, I guess, people that either had family from there or were from there that would have got those jokes, because I was like, if there's this many jokes for somebody like me who is an English speaker, comes from the United States, and I'm recognizing all this, I can imagine, what it is then with all of the jokes, basically.
Yeah, because if like I don't know what the percentages are, but even if like we're not getting like the kind of Hong Kong and Chinese viewers are maybe getting like 20% extra jokes from this movie based on cultural context, um, like that's amazing,
Yeah,
given the amount of jokes that do land or do or certainly hit for me and certainly obviously work for yourself,
yeah,
um, as well. But I think like as we kind of come towards what well we have reached the end of the movie. Basically, the movie basically just ends
yeah,
about 2 seconds after that kind of final invincible fireball. We get like one last kind of big gag where um the karate master does like a kind of mini monologue about like he still will not be defeated, and then Stephen Chow's character is like, just give it up, and then he's like, yeah, you're right, I've been defeated, and collapsed to the ground.
yeah,
um and then we end on, of course, we end on the kind of him getting the girl and like a kind of final embrace between them, and then we just cut to credits.
yeah,
um and that's the end of the movie. Again, I think if you like this kind of brand of silliness, if you have seen kind of not just Hong Kong comedies, but if you'd seen like some more kind of these kind of Asian comedies, similar with kind of Japanese kind of comedies as well, um, and you like that kind of vibe, and you like that kind of like anything goes absurdism, I think you can have a lot of fun with this. But if you're more of like a kind of straight action person and like you prefer your action comedy to be more of a balance between more of a kind of 50-50 between action and comedy, maybe this isn't for you. But I think for the people who can zone into its wavelength, I think this is an absolute
yeah,
joy. But I do recognize that there'll be certain people who won't be able to zone in on that particular wavelength.
yeah. I agree.
Yeah. So I guess that's it. Is there any final thoughts that you have on Love on
Oh,
Delivery or
no,
Stephen Chow?
yeah, I mean, I think Stephen Chow is one of those. But I think he primarily, yeah, I don't think he really stars in his movies anymore. He's just mainly a director for the most part.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think he's one of those names that I always try and I don't know. I like to tell people to check out, because obviously we know certain individuals, as we've talked about, like Jackie Chan or Jet Li, that kind of come from that period. But somebody like Stephen Chow, who was so zany and bizarre, I don't know. He has such a personality, and there is also a deadpan element to his delivery, and um, yeah, I just hope that more people watch his stuff, and it made me want to then rewatch some of the other older stuff that I might have seen or might have not had the chance to see before, that now I can find online.
Yeah. I think I feel the same. Like I would, obviously Stephen Chow has a cult following. He has a cult following in the West, but like maybe he's certainly not as big a name as Jackie Chan, or maybe even the likes of a Jet Li or a Donnie Yen or a Chow Yun Fat,
Yeah.
who are kind of more prominent names to come out of kind of Hong Kong action cinema. But no, so I definitely want to fly the flag for this movie, want to fly the flag for Stephen Chow generally. And I have to say that, like, I had really just seen Shaolin Soccer and Kung Fu Hustle from Stephen Chow. And yeah, I definitely I've always loved them. I've loved them since I first saw them. Like 20 years ago in the case of
Yeah.
Kung Fu Hustle, and slightly over 20 years ago in the case of Shaolin Soccer. So like, yeah, yeah, I definitely watching this feel like I should maybe dig into some of his other stuff, like from Beijing with Love and Chinese Odyssey movies and all these kind of things. So like, I'm definitely keen to do that. So
Which,
if
which I
this,
will, or I will say before we sign off, what I
yeah,
heard about Chinese Odyssey, actually, especially people from, again, with that their family is from there or they are from there, where they talk about you have to watch it twice because they're like the first time within these two parts, it's a comedy. The second time you view it, it's almost becomes a drama. And I haven't watched it a second time, but, and I guess, from not having family history in there, it might not hit me in the same way, but I was
uh,
fascinated by
yeah,
that. And I know even like his film Mermaid, which I think he only directed, is a more recent one, and it's one of the biggest, like, films out of China. So I mean, within China itself, even though he has a cult following, only a cult following in the States or other places, you know, he is still this kind of massive individual.
oh yeah. I mean, like, for sure, for sure. I would agree with that. Like, if you look at any of the kind of major kind of Western comedians of like the last 30 years, or like American ones certainly, or American Canadian ones, um, like Stephen Chow is as far as I can see is as big in Hong Kong and China as like your Jim Carreys or your Ben
Yes.
Stillers or your Will Ferrells, or like, so in that, obviously he's not a cult figure
Yeah.
over there at all. Like, I guess, like, what I was meaning
No.
was like flying the flag for him, kind of here, in English speaking territories,
Yes.
is more
No.
of a cult figure. But yeah, obviously in a lot of Asian territories, he's just a massive freaking star.
Yeah. No, I agree with you completely. And yeah, it's spreading that. No, I just meant it's just fascinating because even when we talk about, individuals of the West, we say they have like such I guess a shorter lifespan or career span where, you look at him and it's like when you talk about individuals, you mentioned, or we've said Jim Carrey, Ben Stiller, Will Ferrell, etc. Where it's like, no, he's just almost in their version. It seems like, from reading as an outsider, it's like all of them combined in a way or something. Like,
Yeah.
he's had a very lengthy career as being kind of the um, number one guy.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I think because, like you say, I think that it's kind of contained the kind of some of the kind of big comedy stars that we mentioned, the likes of um the likes of Jim Carrey or Ben Stiller, or like, they are kind of people who were like massive for like maybe 10 years.
Yeah.
Like, for Jim Carrey, it was between about 94 and 2004. For Ben Stiller, it was between kind of 2000 and 2010. Like, that's when they're massively, and to
Yeah.
the point that, like, I think like a lot of people who are younger, who are maybe certainly in their 20s or younger, might not realize how big those stars were in their day. Like, I don't think maybe people might realize how big Jim Carrey was in 1994 or Ben Stiller was in 2004 now.
Yeah.
But like you say, I think that popularity has continued for Stephen Chow. He still is in that kind of high stratosphere of fame, you know, now as well as back then. So yeah, I think you're right. And like there's certain films and things that we covered that I think is I'm very proud that we've flown the flag for, and I think that this hasn't been extensively covered on a lot of podcasts. I think it has
Yeah.
popped up in a few kind of Asian cinema, kind of Hong Kong cinema podcasts. But so I think we're one of a handful who have covered this, I believe, and I think I think that's a cool thing. And if more people see this movie, and if more people dig into Stephen Chow on the back of this, I'd be very happy with that.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah. So, yes, we've nearly ended. This will be the November episode of our 1994 season. We're nearly coming to the end. So, quickly, Craig, just hit people up with your social media details, anything you want to plug, and then I will shut this down. I will wrap it up.
Yes.
And we will get out of here.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, as always, you can find me on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube, I believe, at Craig is Guilty, or Guilty Animals. And then and I also do the horror podcast Bloodhound Picks, that's PIX, which we are focusing on, as I talked about the last time, where we kind of did a major overhaul and shift our focus, where we're looking at films that you would back in the video store days, you would look at the cover art and look at the very small synopsis, and you would basically choose a movie based purely off of that, and how kind of the movie you created in your head before you actually watch the movie that was, for the most part, usually a disappointment from. And that is what we're looking at, all of those type of movies, and maybe talking about the version that we created in our head before we watched it.
Which was usually the better version.
Yes, the much better version.
Had less shitty effects.
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, I would say to people to check all that stuff out. Yeah. It's always good chatting to you, Craig, and well, I hope people enjoy this podcast. And if you want more of this nonsense, and I will guarantee that like most episodes don't come with esoteric comedy chat. That was just a one-off for this episode. But anyway, if you have enjoyed this nonsense, you can check us out on most podcast platforms. We're on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and a few other podcast providers. So you can check us out on one of those. I think most people check us out on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you want to hit us up with like a message or send us a comment on one of our episodes, you can. We have a Facebook page. We also have a ex Twitter account called at 90s Action. I don't know how when I figure a way to kind of migrate off of that when more I think like we get a lot of traffic that way, so we stay on that despite the misery hellscape that Elon has carved out of that. So like we'll stay on there for a while. So like if you want to DM us, you want to leave any comments on the episodes, you can. That's at 90s Action. And yeah, that's kind of basically where we're at, and that's the social media details. So it just leaves me to wrap this up and tell you to join us again next month when, in a special one-off episode, we will be doing a head-to-head where we will be pitting Drop Zone against the other 1994 skydiving action film. I can't believe I'm saying that sentence. Terminal Velocity. Who is the best skydiving action film of 1994? Tune in our December episode to find out. Until then, though, see ya.